And the first thing we're going to talk about is how you create a new project in Logic. And this is just my desktop here. And what I'm going to do is go down here to my desktop, and then here in my dock, I have the Logic icon. It says Logic Pro X. Now, if you've just installed Logic on your computer, or if you haven't made it to stay in your dock, you're going to have to go to your Finder window. And from a Finder window, which is popped up on my other screen over here, from your Finder window, if you go to your applications, in your applications, you'll see the Logic Pro X, and you can just double click it from there. And I'll go ahead and do that. If I double click it from there, it's actually going to bounce in my dock down here and open up. If you want that to stay in your dock, you can just control click on it and go into options and say keep in dock. I keep it there because I use Logic for pretty much everything, so it stays there. Okay. So when you first open Logic, you're going to come to this screen. And this screen is basically your project chooser. It allows you to choose what kind of Logic project you want to work in based on either a style of music or a type of project that you want. So you'll see templates, things like hip hop, electronic, songwriter, so forth and so on. And these are basically templates. So what they'll do is if I selected hip hop, it'll open a Logic project, and you'll see a brief description here that kind of tells you what's going to be in that project. So to create a project, it says with a gritty mix of drum kits and analog synthesizers that are related to the genre of hip hop, if you will. Now, you may open it up and say, I don't like any of this. It doesn't sound like the hip hop that I'm used to creating or what have you, but it's just a template. Remember that it's a template. It's a starting point. So you may love some things, you may hate some things. You can get rid of things you don't like. You can add additional things, and you can create your own template for that matter after the fact. But as you click on each one of these, you'll see a description. Electronic says a solid blend of drum kits, pulsating synths. The songwriter is similar, but it goes on to add vocal tracks that have processing in them for recording your ideas through a microphone to go along with the drums and bass software instruments that are added there. Orchestral gives you a set of orchestral instruments for scoring. A multi-track just gives you a 24-track audio project with mixed radio effects. If you want to score to picture, pull in a QuickTime movie and write your own music to it, this is where you would go. Or you could go here and say, hey, I don't need any help. I just want to start with an empty project and work from there. And this is where we're going to start from today. We're going to start with an empty project. Before I click on empty project to open one up, and by the way, everything that I'm doing in this course today, you can follow along on your own system. So if you've got Logic open, I would advise you to kind of follow along all the loops that I'm going to be using. If you've installed all of your resources with your Logic install, you will have all of the loops. And even if you don't have the same loops, you can just follow along with your own loops and create your own piece of music. But what I was about to say is before I double click on this to open an empty project, I want to talk about these tabs over here. So the first one says new project. This is where you'll get these templates. The next one says recent. So on recent, it will show you all of your most recent projects that you've created in Logic at the station that you're working on. So it's a quick way to easily access projects that you've been working on. There is the potential to have another folder here that's called My Templates. You won't have a My Templates folder until you create a template of your own. So let's go back to my example of maybe you start with an empty project and then you add in some things that you like to use a lot for a certain type of music that you're creating or a certain type of production. There's an option to save as a template under the file menu. Where is it? Now I can't see it. Do y'all see it? Maybe because I don't have a project up yet. But you can save your project as a template, and then you'll have that folder that says save as template. I'll show you that later. So if I click on empty project, you can also go to the details, and this is called a disclosure triangle. If I click that, it will unfold this so you can see the parameters for that particular template before you even open it. And so you can go in and make some quick changes before you open the project or just see kind of what's happening there. So it says it's going to use a musical grid, which is just going to show bars, beats, ruler across the top. You can set your tempo. The default tempo in pretty much every DAW on earth is 120 beats per minute, but you can change that with either the slider or you can tap a tempo in. So if you have a rhythm, you can just tap the mouse on the tap tempo and it will calculate the tempo, an average of your taps, and create a tempo. You can set the key signature. Now, the key signature is going to be important, especially when you're dealing with Apple loops. So knowing which key you're working in is helpful at that point. You can set your time signature, and you can also set your audio interfaces input and output. So right now I'm using my Universal Audio Apollo for my input, and I'm using something called a multi-output device for my output. Here you can set your sample rate, and your sample rate will be dictated by your audio interface as far as what sample rates you can choose. Here you can set a frame rate if you're working with picture. And if you're working in surround, you can set your surround format. I'm going to leave that as it is, and I'm just going to go ahead and say choose. So I'm choosing an empty project. Now, very important here. What you're seeing now is what I like to call the GarageBand Pro version of Logic Pro X. Apple makes both GarageBand and it makes Logic Pro. And when you buy a new Mac, as you probably know, you get GarageBand. So I think Apple's philosophy is, hey, if you already got a Mac and you've been creating music on GarageBand and now you want to take it to the next level and you buy Logic Pro, let's make this transition very easy. So the first time you open Logic, you will get a screen that looks like this, that looks very much like GarageBand. I mean, it looks identical to GarageBand. So when you see these wooden panels on the sides and your new tracks dialog looks like this, then you want to actually go ahead and probably turn on your advanced features. Or maybe not. But for what we're going to be doing in this course, you will need your advanced feature setup. So I'm going to show you how to do that really quickly. You just need to go over to the Logic Pro X menu up here in the top left corner. Click on it, go down to Preferences, and from Preferences, you want to go to Advanced Tools. When the Advanced Tools preference shows up, you want to say Show Advanced Tools, and the minute you click this, the screen's going to blink off, and you'll notice immediately the wood panels go away, but you haven't turned on all of the additional features. So you could check these one at a time, but I would just advise you to say Enable All. Screen will blink again. Now you close this out. Now you are in the full-fledged version of Logic Pro X. And pretty much anything that can be done in the software is available to you at this point. Now what I want to do is go ahead and create a track in Logic. Whenever you open Logic, that new track dialog pops up automatically, but because I changed the preferences, it disappeared. So the first button we're going to talk about is this button here in the top left corner called the New Tracks button. So if you click that, it will allow you to create new tracks. So now this looks different from the new tracks dialog that was up in the GarageBand Pro version. And you have the ability to create software instrument tracks. Software instrument tracks would be used to put a virtual instrument there and then send MIDI from a MIDI controller to it to trigger sounds from it to record your composition. You have an external MIDI type of track, which will also record MIDI onto a track, but it will then send that MIDI out of the computer to an external, let's say, for instance, synthesizer or keyboard that you have outside of the computer that's generating the sound, not a software instrument. In the second column, you have your audio tracks. So I have a basic audio track that you would create to, say, for instance, you want to record from a microphone or a line level instrument like a keyboard or a drum machine. Or you can choose guitar and bass, which is also just a audio track. But when you instantiate the track or create the track, it will have processing on it for guitars and bass, things like amp simulation or amp modulations. So you can go DI, but still have the sound of a speaker cabinet or an amp cabinet for guitar or bass. And then finally, there's something called a drummer track, which is was new in Logic 10 when they first brought it out. This basically gives you a virtual drummer that you can produce for your studio, or for your project, if you will. What's unique about this type of track is you can't record to it. It already comes populated with 2 8-bar regions of a drum performance, and then it's dynamically controlled based on the edit portion at the bottom of the screen. It'll make more sense if I demonstrated it later, but not today. But just know that that's a drummer course. So we're going to go to an audio track, and I just need one. I'm going to say create. All right. So now I have an audio track in my project, and you can see the audio track is actually monitoring my microphone, but I don't have it input monitoring, so we're not getting the phasing problem.